respectively. It's the hacking lab. All you really have to do is some screenshots. So let's talk about AAA. AAA stands for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. Or who are you, what you are allowed to do, and what in the world did you do while you were in the system. There are some dependencies, and who here, guys, anybody take 471, CIS 471? They talked about this a little bit, right? They breezed over it. Did you actually see it in operation?
Not really.
No.
Yeah.
LAB2, when you go through the ACS piece, if we can get everything working, you'll see it in operation. Okay, actual working. So you can authenticate without having to be authorized. You can authenticate with no accounting, but you have to have, in order for you to have authorization and accounting, you need to have authentication. Authentication is the big key. All right. And when we talk about authentication, we're talking about credentials, a username password pair that is authenticated on an off-system server. All right, so that when we had set up Telnet before on the router, and we put in a username and password, and we had login local into the VTY lines. That was using local credentials. What AAA does is it allows you to go to some system other than the host system, the router or the switch, to look up those credentials. And that's all it's doing. So there's a couple of protocols that you can use to accomplish that, Radius and TACACS, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Radius is Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service. Very popular. It's open source. It can be used in a wide variety of servers, both Linux and Microsoft. It uses UDP as its transport. Older ones used 1645 and 1646. Newer Radius uses 1812 and port 1813. Okay, keep that in mind. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons and differences between Radius and TACACS. Radius uses a pre-shared key between the host and the Radius server, the authenticating server. Okay, that is nothing more than a password. The pre-shared key is nothing more than a password. All right. It takes this pre-shared key and computes it through an MD5 hash to produce a 16-octet value that is then what we call XORed. And all XORed is it right or is it wrong? If it's right, it passes, great. If it's wrong, it fails, it doesn't allow any further connectivity. Compared to TACACS, our Terminal Access Controller Access Control System, this is a Cisco proprietary protocol, TACACS Plus is. The older TACACS protocol was open source. TACACS Plus uses a modular approach to AAA. All right? And it leverages a NAS, or Network Access Server, not to be confused with a network attached storage. They're two different things. All a NAS is a router or switch, whatever you're trying to get into. TACACS uses TCP, port 49, for communication. Now, let's stop there real quick. And talk about the differences, the pros and cons between TACACS and Radius. TACACS uses a pre-shared key as well. All right, but it uses an algorithm to calculate multiple MD5 hashes using rotating keys based on the single shared key. It does this in each packet. The downside is the hash for each packet is only 16 bytes long. So you capture enough packets, you can probably guess the key. One thing that you have to take into consideration when choosing one of these mechanisms for authentication is the type of attacks that can be used against both. All right? They're not 100% impervious to being pilfered. All right? You have to look at the base protocol that they're using. In radius, UDP. We talked a little bit about this on Tuesday. The type of attack that you can use against a service that is using UDP would be what? If I were to try to overpower a radius service, I know it uses UDP, I can get a packet capture of a conversation to the authenticating server, the radius server. What type of an attack would that be if I use that against it? No, not a man in the middle. That's a style because I'm inserting myself, but what am I doing if I have that stream?
Denial service.
No, it's not a denial service. It's a replay attack because I'm just taking that stream and I'm pushing it back. I'm inserting myself in the middle. I'm going to have to spoof an IP address, so that's where your man in the middle is. So you're on the right track, but I'm going to do a replay attack against it. Okay? Whereas with a TCP, again, a man in the middle attack, masquerade attack, is I'm going to spoof an IP address. All right? But when I'm getting taking over an established connection or trying to take over an established connection, I have to break the encryption first. I've got to guess that pre-shared key in order for this to work. Okay, in TCP. What type of an attack is that against TCP? When I take over an established connection, what have I done to it? I've hijacked it, right? It's a hijack attack. Okay, so I've hijacked that established connection and I'm taking over control based on one of the parties. Implementing AAA, which we'll look at these commands here in a little bit. You start the service on the router by initiating the command AAA new model. And you go through the authentication, authorization, and accounting piece. That's how you put the different types of commands in. In the book, there's some examples in Chapter 8, 8-4, for setting up AAA. Also in Chapter 9, there's a walkthrough for how you set up the ACS server. That's all what Chapter 9 is. You're going to need a VM in GNS3 to make this work. Alright, so hopefully you've built a VM with 2003 or 2008. And we'll start working on the rest of LAB2. This time I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm not going to save anything. I'm just going to close this out. Yep. Sure if you want to. So first and foremost, I'm going to start up GNS3. I'm just shutting down this guy. Alright, when GNS3 starts up, alright, we worked on LAB2 before. So instead of starting the whole project all over again, I'm going to go to open a project. Find LAB2. Go into LAB2, select the topology.net, and click open. GNS3 will start up. Okay, I'm just going to turn everything on. Start up all the prompts. Everything kind of moving here. And I have to ensure that on R2 my VM has full connectivity to my router. So I'm going to have to do a couple of things on my host machine since I'm using VM Player to make that work. Start VM Player. If I do a show, not show, ipconfig/all, and I look at my VM network settings, see I have a VM net 8. My regular gigabit connection. I have VMnet 8, VMnet 2. Okay. So I have an ACS server already here. I'm going to go ahead and edit this virtual machine settings and look at its network adapter. It is set for host only. That should be VMnet 2. Okay, I'm not using that. I'm not using bridged. I'll play that virtual machine. I'm going to have to change its IP address on the virtual machine and make sure that I have connectivity to my system. Alright, while that's starting up, let's go in, and as you can see, all the routers, they start up in default. If I go to my folder where my configs are saved in my project, under my temp folder, LAB2, and then configs. Here's all my configs. So if I open up a config file and copy it to the clipboard, all I have to do is go into the router. Once I get that router prompt, go into enable mode, go into global configuration mode, and then all I have to do is take my cursor down here to where the green button is, or the green cursor, and right click. That will paste it into PuTTY as such, and paste everything into the router. That way I don't have to go and reinvent and put everything back in there. Okay, everybody see how I did that? I'm going to do it 2 more times. Don't worry, if you didn't get it then, you'll get it the next time. If I do a show run, one thing you have to be very cognizant about is that interfaces start and shut down. So a lot of times students will load this up right before they email me. They'll look at it and, oh, okay, everything looks good and everything else. And they'll send me their config with their interfaces in shutdown mode. And you will lose 3 to 5 points right off the bat per interface. So make sure your interfaces in your config that you send me don't have shutdown in them. So I have to come in here, go into those interfaces, no shut, both of them. Come up.
We have to reload these manually.
It's a bug of GNS3 because there's no onboard flash that it recognizes. This is one of the things you have to overcome. I'm going to go into R2, grab its config, right click and paste it in. Go to its interfaces, turn them on, and finally the config of R3. Copy, Control C, go to R3, enable mode, global configuration mode, right here, right click, paste the config in, go to the interfaces, 00 and 01, no shut both of them. And you can see OSPF comes up. Everything is good to go. So I'm back to basically where I was on Tuesday. Now going back to my VM. A couple things I need to do with my VM. Need to come on. Manage network connections. Properties. Now you look at my TCP/IP settings. Looky there. Looks like it's all set up. Alright, however, I have one problem. My IP address on the VM net, it's set to .1 on my controller, my NIC card, my virtual NIC. Alright? I need my gateway .2, and for the purposes of this lab, I need to change the IP address of R2's Ethernet. Zero zero from .1 to .2. Good. Good. So I can ping the router. I can ping my VM network. Go back to the router here and make sure that I can do the same thing here. Ping myself. Yes, I can ping myself. Can I ping my adapter? No. So I need to figure out why I can't do this. First thing I want to check is my firewall settings. Just for testing purposes, I want to turn everything off. And it looks like everything is off already. Well, maybe not. Still didn't help. Okay. Let me do this, just for giggles. I'm going to see what IP address I get from DHCP, and that will help me diagnose which VM adapter I'm using. Network 5. Okay, good. I got something. How in the world did I get a 134 address on host only? Interesting. Interesting. Okay. I really have to work on my VM player. I think because I'm running VM player and VM workstation simultaneously, this is a little screwed up. So I am not seeing. I go into VMware. I look at the virtual network editor. That's why I'm getting it. Host is tied in VM Player. Host is tied. The host is tied to VMnet 1. In this case, it's bridged. It's not a host connection. Interesting. All right. That's why I'm getting a DHCP. Change this here real quick. Host, apply. Let's see if that fixed it. Come on. What was taking so long? Uh-oh. That's not good.